There is a moment, maybe you've had it, standing in front of a mirror, pressing your hand against your stomach and thinking, okay, that's just extra weight. That's just food I haven't burned yet. Passive, waiting, temporary. Like a storage unit you keep meaning to clean out. And the frustrating thing is that this is exactly what most of us are told. Eat less, move more, and eventually the storage unit empties. Simple math. Calories in, calories out. We treat belly fat like it's just sitting there, inert, patient, harmless until it isn't. But here's what almost nobody talks about. That fat is not sitting there at all. It is working. Right now, as you read this, the fat stored deep in your abdomen is secreting hormones, sending chemical signals to your organs, whispering instructions into your bloodstream that your liver, your heart, and your immune system are actively responding to. It is not storage. It is a factory. And it has been running a night shift you never signed off on. This isn't about appearance. This isn't about dress sizes or beach season or the particular cruelty of waistbands after age 35. This is about what is happening inside your body right now, regardless of what you look like from the outside. And this is the part that changes everything. Because some of the most dangerous levels of this fat exist in people who look, by every external measure, completely fine. Let's start with a distinction that most people have never heard. And once you hear it, you will never think about fat the same way again. There are two fundamentally different types of body fat, and they are not equal. The first is subcutaneous fat, the kind you can pinch. It sits just under the skin. It jiggles. It's visible. It is the fat we culturally obsess over, the fat we spend billions trying to eliminate. And here's the irony. Subcutaneous fat is largely metabolically quiet. It is genuinely closer to passive storage. It has its own problems, but it is not the biological emergency. The second type is visceral fat. And this is where the story turns strange. Visceral fat lives deeper, behind the abdominal muscles, packed in between and around your organs. You cannot pinch it. You cannot see it in a mirror. A person can have a completely flat stomach and still be carrying dangerous levels of visceral fat around their liver, their kidneys, their intestines. The only way to know for certain is an MRI or a CT scan. The scale doesn't know. The mirror doesn't know. Your genes don't know. This fat is invisible, and it is not quiet. Because visceral fat, unlike its subcutaneous cousin, is metabolically hyperactive. It has a direct drainage system, the portal vein, that feeds straight into the liver. Whatever visceral fat releases, the liver gets first. Before your heart. Before your brain. Before anyone else at the table. And visceral fat releases a lot. Fatty acids. Inflammatory proteins called cytokines. Hormones that interfere with insulin. It is essentially a neighbor who keeps dumping garbage directly into your water supply, and your liver is the water treatment plant that never gets a break. And this is where it gets strange. Your liver, flooded with this constant upstream signal, begins to change its own behavior. It starts storing fat it wouldn't otherwise store. It becomes resistant to insulin's instructions. It starts producing inflammatory markers of its own. This is how visceral fat creates what researchers call a low-grade systemic inflammation. Not the dramatic inflammation of a sprained ankle, not the visible swelling of an injury. Silent, chronic, like a smoke alarm going off in a closed room. The alarm is real. The fire is real. But nobody outside the room can hear it. Now follow that inflammation upstream to the heart. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most significant known contributors to atherosclerosis, the process by which arterial walls thicken and harden. Visceral fat doesn't just passively increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. It actively participates in building the conditions that cause it. It secretes a specific molecule called resistin, which tells the walls of your arteries to become more permeable to the fats circulating in your blood. And it secretes another called PAI1, which makes your blood clot more easily. You may be eating reasonably, you may be exercising, but if you're carrying significant visceral fat, your cardiovascular system is operating in a different biological environment than someone who isn't, regardless of what your cholesterol panel looks like last year. Then there is the hormonal cascade. Visceral fat disrupts the conversation between your pancreas and your cells. Insulin is supposed to work like a key, unlocking your cells so glucose can get in and be used as fuel. But visceral fat releases enough inflammatory interference that your cells start to ignore the key. They change their locks. This is insulin resistance, and it doesn't announce itself. There is no pain. There is no visible symptom. Your pancreas responds by producing more insulin, working harder to compensate until eventually it can't keep up. Type 2 diabetes does not arrive suddenly. It is the final chapter of a story that visceral fat has been narrating quietly for years. And here is the part that medicine is only beginning to fully understand. Visceral fat behaves less like tissue and more like an organ. It has its own cellular machinery for producing hormones. It responds to stress signals. It responds to sleep deprivation. When your cortisol spikes, because you're under pressure, because you're not sleeping, because you skipped meals, visceral fat doesn't just accumulate faster, it becomes more biologically active, more inflammatory, more disruptive. Stress and visceral fat have a circular relationship, each one feeding the other in a loop your body didn't evolve to break out of easily. Because this is the biological misfire at the center of all of it. Visceral fat evolved for a reason. In a world of genuine scarcity, of winters without food, of migrations across empty plains, your body learned to store energy close to the organs that need it most, close to the gut, close to the liver, metabolically accessible, ready to be burned in an emergency. The system worked because emergencies were actual emergencies. The cortisol spike was a predator. The fast was a famine. And then the body recovered. The mismatch is that we now live in a world of chronic low-level stress with no physical resolution. The cortisol spikes constantly. Traffic, deadlines, bad news, a phone that never stops. The energy never gets burned in a sprint. The fat accumulates in that deep visceral layer, keeps signaling, keeps secreting, keeps quietly doing its job in a body that no longer needs it to. This isn't weakness. This isn't failure. This is a very old system running in a very new world, with no one having updated the software. But here is what matters. And this is where it genuinely gets good. Visceral fat, because it is so metabolically active, is also the first fat your body burns when conditions change. It is exquisitely responsive to specific interventions in a way that subcutaneous fat simply is not. Not crash diets. Not intense restriction that spikes cortisol and tells your body it is back in a famine. The interventions that specifically target visceral fat are almost counterintuitively gentle. Sustained moderate aerobic activity, reduction in refined carbohydrates, improved sleep quality, stress regulation. Each of these directly addresses the biological machinery that keeps visceral fat active and growing. Sleep deprivation alone has been shown to meaningfully increase visceral fat accumulation independent of diet. Meaning, all else equal, the person sleeping 6 hours a night is accumulating more of this particular fat than the person sleeping 8. Not because they're eating more, because their cortisol is chronically elevated and their body is responding accordingly. Your body is not your enemy in this. That is the thing. Every mechanism, the insulin response, the inflammatory signaling, the cortisol loop, is your body doing something it was designed to do. The question is simply whether you understand what it's responding to. Because once you do, once you can see the machinery instead of just the outcome, the path forward stops being about willpower and starts being about conditions. Change the conditions. Change what your body is responding to. The fat is not the problem. The fat is the message. And now you can actually read it.